It's good to have you join us back on Global Morning. Of course, we have a whole lot of things to talk to you about. In Nigeria, a whole lot happening. We've seen across the newspaper review segment, we had a whole lot of stories from politics to business. But we want to talk about Nigerians and the spending deadline for extension. We'll look at the types of fiscal flexibility or policy failure in the making. That talks about the budgets and its implementation from what the presidency have. Let's quickly give you a breakdown to basically what this is about. Welcome to this particular segment. I'm still here and I'm Anita Patrick, and of course I still have Muntari Kasim.
Certainly, we're here.
Of course, a whole lot to talk about. But let's quickly give you a background. Our big conversation this particular hour talks about Nigeria's fiscal direction under scrutiny. And Muntari, of course.
Of course, President Tinubu, as we know, he has signed the 68.32 trillion naira 2026 budget, and that has been signed into law. And crucially, that actually extends the 2025 spending deadline from the previous one to about June 30, this 2026.
And looking at all of that, this shows a pragmatic move to complete projects, of course, and a sign of deeper fiscal inefficiencies. So that gives us a group. But let's break it down for our audience to actually follow suit to why we need to look at this concerns. Well, President Bola Tinubu has approved a record of 68.32 trillion naira budget for 2026, which is significant allocations to capital projects, debt servicing, and recurrent expenditure. Alongside this is the administration's extended the lifespan of the 2025 budget from March 31st to June 30, just like Montero gave us that heads up, to allow ministries and agencies complete ongoing projects. Well, government says the extension is aimed at improving project delivery and ensuring value for money, particularly for infrastructure projects nearing completion, because we have projects, of course, which have started the process, but the completion was one of the reasons why this was looked into. However, critics argue that repeated extensions signal weak budget discipline and also persistence of overlapping fiscal cycles in Nigeria's public finance system. Well, that brings us to one of the focus, which Muntari.
Of course, we have to put this into proper perspective, because Nigeria, we know, has struggled with budget and implementation over many timelines and for many years, of course.
And then, of course, there's been a concern where Nigerians are asking why the cycle, why the drawing back, why the extension,
back and forth
with all of this. Well, exactly the reasons why we're looking at this. And despite promises to return to the strict January-December cycle, we're still seeing rollovers and extensions, of course.
So the big question people have been asking is this a smart fiscal flexibility, or is this a failure of policy in disguise? That's the question Nigerians have been asking.
And to join us answer this question, of course, we need an expert to break this down, is Dr. Aldo Liberty Oseni, who's the Director, Center for Development Communication, and he'll be speaking to us on all of this. And it's good to have you join us, Dr. Oseni. This is something that needs a whole lot of breakdown. We need Nigerians to understand why this is happening. Why not still maintain the January-December cycle of the budget? Why do we still need to have extension and across board? So this is confusing for many Nigerians. Maybe you can help us understand the decision so far.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you for having me. And again, good morning. And I am glad to have this conversation. But to say that I don't know how you're looking at it, and I don't know the perspective you're taking. But I think for me, really, there are two issues that I need us to look at. Irrespective of what people are saying, irrespective of how government communication paints it or frames it, I think we should look at in terms of what I call fiscal rationality and institutional capacity deficits. Because for me, really, the 2025 spending deadline extension, for me, really, reflects less a case of physical flexibility, and more is more a governance and implementation deficits. Don't forget, this clearly signals weak institutional capacity, just as I had said, for budget execution. Delays in funding disbursement, delays in funding disbursement or absorption, and a systemic inefficiency within public sector delivery structures. We shouldn't forget that. And in this sense, for me, really, the issue is not merely budget discipline, as the government wants to put it, but state capacity and policy implementation failure. Don't forget, the Minister of Health, I think Ali Pate, I just hope I called his name well, said before the National Assembly that his ministry got about 1% of the budget. He's not the only one. Several ministry, departments and agencies that appeared before the National Assembly members. They said that they didn't get money. Money was not released to them. Now the question is, in a country where we have cases or clear cases of lack of transparency in the management of public resources, how do we situate this kind of behavior? And again, don't forget that the Federal Executive Council admitted to lawmakers that the billion of naira appropriated by the parliament. You know, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Hello,
you.
can
Please
you
go.
hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
So, yes, I'm saying that the Federal Executive Council, admitted to the lawmakers that billions of naira appropriated by the parliament, for infrastructure, health and development projects were never released to the ministry. And we want to hear the conversation. Why did that not happen? So, what is this conversation about? What you're talking about is physical discipline. No, for me, really, it is not physical discipline. The state needs to come out clear. Of course, there are conversations around. Of course, I don't want to take that serious because it's normal thing politicians will say that because that's their way of life. Looking for opportunity, of course, some are even saying that the monies were stolen, but I don't believe that. But I think that the government has the responsibility to come out clear to explain to Nigerians what has happened. Because I had expected the National Assembly members that granted this extension to ask the government, why did you not release the money? And where is the money? Don't forget that we have this thinking that even in the fiscal year, we prepare budget. The budget is actually an appropriation act. So we need to see government release money. And how come the monies that were not just released? We are talking in terms of capital expenditure. Why were they so easy, so easy? Why was it so simple for them to spend? Sorry, let me not use the word squander, to spend the recurrent expenditure. And in this country, we have seen the president, we have seen even the National Assembly members themselves implement projects that were some of us said didn't have the National Assembly approval. We saw these guys do that. So why is it that when it comes to the implementation of physical projects or capital projects tied to the national budget, people are telling us that the monies were not released, and there is no clear communication. And the only communication we are hearing, we are seeing, is that it's tied to fiscal budget discipline. No, 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 no. I don't believe that. I do not believe that because the MDs themselves have come to say that we didn't get money. Money was not released to us, and the question therefore becomes why. So there are two issues we should be looking at. Now, for me, is physical rascality. I'm sorry to use the word, but that's what it is. Second, we need to interrogate state capacity to deliver. State capacity to deliver. What are the issues? Is it procurement processes? Are they the issues? Are they the issues? So the state needs to clearly explain. But I also had expected the National Assembly members to actually put the state on its stool to explain why didn't you release money? What has happened? Why carrying it there? So who you see the issue, let me explain to you now. You see, the extension for me really the extension for me really is not evidence of physical flexibility, which I have said, but a manifestation of deep governance and implementation failure. This is what it is. Because why often framed as administrative necessity, the pattern of extreme under release of appropriation fund, sometimes below 2%, as we have seen, reveals, a state that plans inability. And I think that in such a context, a budget extension, we shouldn't forget that budget extension becomes a tool of continuity and more mechanism that marks systematic inefficiency and weak accountability. So I need you to underline the word systematic inefficiency and weak accountability. Who accounts for the money? Oh, before we know, 2027 six budget is running concurrently. Who accounts for the money? I think that we should get serious in this country and stop this narrative that tries to make it complicated without clear communication. This is what I think.
I'm looking at this thing because you've talked about how this shows the inefficiency and the accountability and the concerns that needs to be looked at and why this extension keeps spanning over time. So these are questions that needs answer. You've just explained we have capital projects that are always there, or implementation becomes a problem, or completion becomes a concern. So the thing is, concerns are or questions are asked. What does this extension really mean in the fiscal policy terms? Because if we have this repeatedly, how do we tend to find, because for the common man, he's trying to understand fiscal policy, all of those grammars that come with all of these terms. But for we, the elites who understands this thing, so what does this really mean for fiscal policy terms that benefits the people when it comes to the extension year in, year out? Because we always see this extension coming where there's no completion of one, or one is being proposed, and another one is still in the long run coming to bear, basically.
One, let me say that what this means, the state explanation, is that it did that perhaps to guarantee fiscal responsibility, which is that the state argues that it wants quality, and it also wants what's the right word now? He wants value for money. Exactly, that's the right word. The state wants value for money. So what this means is that every penny spent should be accounted for. That's the conversation the state claims. But the truth of the matter, therefore, is that we live in a country where we have seen this kind of thing not turn out the way it ought to be. Don't also forget that before the budget was drawn, debated, and approved, these things were tied to clear. I believe that it will be prepared based on clear identified problem that needed to be addressed. So we needed to see the state release the money. I think that refusing to release money is not the way to go. What happens is that releasing the money should go with accountability. And this is where I try to explain to people that what we need to do is to go beyond transparency to accountability. Transparency means that you have released 1 trillion to the Ministry of Works and Housing, for instance. But for instance, then accountability means that the state should explain to citizens using the instrumentality of what I call participatory communication approach to explain to the citizen how the 1 trillion was expended. So what I'm trying to say, therefore, is that yes, if the state there's every need for the state to ensure that every penny counts. There's every need is for states to ensure there's value for money, but an inability to release funds to military departments and agencies, hiding under the bureaucratic rectitude or the bureaucratic bottleneck or under the disguise of value for money says a whole lot. Because I had wanted the National Assembly to prove better, to ask questions. What has happened to the money? Because the implication of this, therefore, let me answer your question. The implication of this, therefore, is that you have a country where budget is being drawn, budget is being planned, approval, National Assembly grants approval, and you have appropriation act. And at the end of the fiscal year, what you're hearing is that only 1 or 2% of money meant for physical or capital expenditure was released. And the other way around, the money meant for the current expenditure practically was fully released. What this means for me as a development communicator, what this means for me is that really the state is not interested in addressing any problem. The state is interested in living. So the officials of the state are just interested in living a comfortable life. They didn't have any problem taking money for recurrent expenditure, which is perhaps their salary, their entitlement, their emolument, their travel. Fantastic. But when it comes to the physical project, which plays huge role in the development and growth of a society, we begin to hear that the money was not released. And why was the money not released? That is the fundamental question we should be asking. That is the fundamental question we should answer at the micro level, we should answer at the macro level, we should answer at the meso level. Until we get to that level where the conversation is around systematic inefficiency and weak accountability system, until we address this problem, this is going to happen next year. But let me also say, because this is a national television, my training in development communication, I have clear understanding. I do not find it funny. I am not an expert, and I've never claimed to be an expert, because in development we learn and unlearn. Of course, I consider myself development communication authority, but I'm not an expert. And most importantly, I discuss development. That's what I do. So I do not agree that what they are talking about in the case of budget responsibility to have value for money is the issue. The issue is the structure, systemic inefficiency and accountability. The state needs to explain what has happened to the money, because we are in a society where accountability takes where accountability takes a backseat. This is what I'm saying.
That's which are concerns to you. Of course, you, like you mentioned, you're just on development side and you're looking at how growth and how that can be palatable to the people, if I get you correctly. We want to look at all this things, and Mukhtar has something basically to throw to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor, for putting this in proper perspective. You've outlined the background to this particular incident, and the people who have supported this particular development, they've said it is in line with global best practices. So in your own perspective, is this not what happens across the world? Is Nigeria different from what we've seen across the developmental world, if you like? Is this something that's out of the ordinary, or it's in line with global best practices? That's my question.
Now, I want to ask you a question. You see, this is my frustration when I have this conversation. And it's my frustration. What do you mean by global best practices? So when it comes to covering state inefficiency, it's a global best practices, right? And who defines global best practices? Who defines it? So when it comes to delivery, when it comes to separation of power, when it comes to the dividend and the delivery of governance, made possible via democracy, you talk in terms of global best practices. Of course, even if it is a global best practice, as you have said, global best practices demand that the state provides valid explanation. That's what it is. The global best practices demand that the National Assembly members rigorously investigate what has happened, why was the money not released, and communicate clearly to the citizens what went wrong. That is what global best practices mean. And I do not like the word global best practice. I should rather use the word the best practice. So the people shouldn't come and hide on the global. You do not justify. You do not just. There's nothing like global best practice. There's nothing like uniform governance everywhere in the world. And this is why. This is why we have what we call cooperative federalism. So the media narrative that you want to justify that on the basis of global best practices it's for me it's totally unacceptable. It is totally unacceptable because let us see if you say this is global best practice. I used to give people the example of Egypt. Egypt is an African country. I always tell people about Rwanda. I always tell people about Botswana. I always tell people about Mauritius. These are African countries doing fantastically well. You can't give excuses for failure, and all your explanation is that is global best practice. So it wasn't a global best practice when you were able to pull money meant for recurrent expenditure. Do you understand? If it were to be global best practices, okay, let me ask you, let me not even talk about global best practice. Let's even talk of continental practice. How many times have you heard that the National Assembly or the lawmakers in Egypt put public resources to buy cars for themselves? If we have the National Assembly members that understand what their roles are, understand what their responsibilities are, we will be where we are. The National Assembly members that sing on your mandate we shall stand at the presentation of the national budget. Rather than scrutinize the national budget, is it the National Assembly member that will tell people this is the global best practice? I think that we should be serious in terms of governance issues. And I also think that the media should help Nigerian people. The media should help Nigerian people. It's not this comfortable narrative shouldn't be allowed to fly around. We need to hold those who represent the states. We need to hold those who govern us responsible. We need to hold them responsible. As a matter of fact, we should be able to hear that physical capital expenditure was released more than recurrent expenditure. These guys are not interested in solving any problem. And when you do this thing, you come out and tell us global best practice. They should mention global best practices that tolerate this kind of inefficiency in our system. This is what I'm saying, and I disagree with that kind of narrative. But for me, it's 40 is a lame intellectual narrative that is not acceptable to me as a person. This is what I'm saying.
That you talk about is, like you said, you're a development partner expert. That's what mindset you have. You've talked about transparency, you've talked about accountability and the role of the legislature in ensuring that questions are asked to this kind of issues and why it needs to be looked into in-depthly. But I want to quickly ask, we talked about the MDAs who have also said they don't have enough to put out this project, because we talked about the capital expenditures and all of that. So my question to you right now, are the MDAs being rewarded for inefficiency? That's one question I want to get for clarity, basically, because if they also don't get enough, their inefficiencies, is that what they're rewarded for, basically? So we get that clear.
Exactly my point. When I talk about government, I'm not talking in terms of, I was not even talking about that. I was talking in terms, I said systemic inefficiency. It's across board. Don't forget that what we run in this part of the world is a patronage system. How many of them really understand what it means to effectively design and implement development projects that when you finish, that when you subject it into rigorous monetary, participatory monetary and evaluation process, you can point at measurable indicators and measurable success, measurable outcome, and measurable impact. How many of them? That's why I'm saying that for most of these guys, at the level of MDAs, at the level of ministry, department, and agency, for most of them, their own understanding about budget, about government, is release of public funds, raise memos, and spend money irrespective of what. So I am saying that we will not be able to build a system that will produce competent people that will be able to run, design, and implement management issues. Have you not heard? Have you not heard in this country where people people sit on budget, fund approval or fund release? At the end of the day, people were asked to refund money. Or sometimes what you see is that they sit on the money 2 months or 3 months to the end of the fiscal year. You see them release money, do what we call performative theater development here and there, and retire the money. That's exactly what the problem is. So we need to understand that we need to pursue participatory development approach with people at the center, competent people at the center. That is what it means. Otherwise, if we know the implication of what it means, that at the end of the year, the ministers, at the end of the year, the permanent secretaries, at the end of the year, top government officials casually will appear before the National Assembly members with the audacity that monies were not released. And what the National Assembly members did was to say, yes, on your mandate we shall stand, and we are extending to June or thereabout to 2026. What was that? What is that? So I am saying that our incompetence, not incompetence, our systemic inefficiency has shown our systemic inefficiency and weak accountability is across board. And I am saying people be held responsible. The National Assembly people must do their job. Of course, you would have argued that the citizens should do that, but we don't have the citizens with the capacity to do that, because the concern of average citizen on the street is how to achieve the 3 basic physiological needs of Maslow theory: food, clothing, and shelter. So they are still struggling with that. But the National Assembly members that have been empowered should ask the necessary questions. When we ask the necessary questions, we get the necessary answers. So to your question, do we consider this as an incompetence or failure of the MDAs? My answer to that is yes, but not alone on their own failure, not alone on their own failure, because you cannot exclude the executive arm of the government, which is the fulcrum or the NG room where all the MDAs operate. So my own question therefore becomes that the executive arm of the government should explain to Nigeria what has happened to the money. This is the explanation. Because at the end of the day, what will happen is that when you get to June, July, oh, we will forget after all they have been extended. The question is that every year we do budget, how are we deploying public resources? We need to begin to ask questions. How do we spend public resources, public funds? Do we
Okay.
just do budget ceremoniously every year and
So if I may come in at the moment, Doctor, if you can hear me, awesome. If I may come in at the moment, I get the passion, I get the drive, I get the fact that you've mentioned the three factors that the common man on the streets is also looking for: to the shelter, the feeding, and the clothing. Basically, that's what he's looking out for, because he doesn't understand where those who are supposed to check, or we are looking out for those who can check how they can ask the basic questions and get it right, and then there will be accountability and transparency to every fiscal credibility we need to get when it comes to this budget and the spending deadline given to the MDAs and also the authorities who are in charge of this. We'll just have to hold you down, and we'll come back after this timeout where we need to continue this conversation. Please stay with us, Doctor, and we'll get back to you. We've been talking about the 2025 spending deadline extension, fiscal flexibility or policy failure in the making. Of course, you had Dr. Oseni talking passionately from where the National Assembly needs to understand how that needs to work out for them. And it's not just around where the capital projects or how that is put into, but it is about accountability. You mentioned to him about the World Global Standards, and he was critical about he was critical about it. If that's the practice, what changes? What should change? What should we get right in the long run?
And like he said, who gets to define what is global best practice? Yeah. And if we cannot be, based on what he said, we cannot cherry pick what we consider as best practice. Yes. We're saying we want to abide by global best practices in our spending cycle. Why are we not abiding by global best practices in terms of infrastructure, in terms of those basic needs he has?
That people need to have.
So if we're talking about global best practices, I think what he's saying is we should go all across board, not a particular segment that we call global best practice.
Okay, so while we look at all of those put in place, let's quickly take this breather, and then we'll have Dr. Oseni join us back, and we'll continue the discussion on all of these things and what should be done rightly while we take taste and texture. Please stay with us. We have something amazing that you wouldn't miss out. Please stay with us. Joining us virtually here, and he is still going to speak to this issue. Dr. Oseni, it's good to have you join us back on the program. Well, like we said, there's a whole lot of questions that need answers, and we want to look at the economic impacts of all of this extension. So my question to you right now is this extension inflationary or neutral in economic impact? And let's talk about the way forward and how this can be mended and to see that Nigerians feel the impacts more in a positive way.
Well, I would want you to clearly frame your question so that I clearly understand where you want me to intervene.
Go ahead. I wanted to hear what you said when I asked the question on the economic impact, but you said something I was trying to get what you said.
I said that I need you to frame your question clearly so that I understand what my response will be. I didn't get the question clearly.
I said we've been talking about the budget and where accountability should be, where in terms of the National Assembly to ask basic questions or pertinent questions, and then there should be proper alignments to all of that. So I'm asking basically, is this extension inflationary or neutral in economic impact? Because we've talked about the budget extension and how this affects a whole lot of things. So I want to know, let me start with this first, so you understand me. Could overlapping budgets distort economic planning and investor confidence? Because we've looked at how this is cut across the board.
Well, clearly that does. But I think that what we should look at clearly is its consequence in, yes, an economy, yes, on accountability, yes, on citizen perception, yes, on foreign perception. In terms of investors' confidence, directly, I don't think it will, but because of the kind of perception it creates, it makes us look like a country which is not serious about governance. That's what it is. Secondly, it makes us, the citizens, look at governance as something that has nothing to do with accountability. When you find yourself into governance, it treats public resources as your personal property, and then nobody's held accountable. On the issue of economy, of course, you need money. You need money to do the necessary things. And when I talk even economy, I'm not talking in terms of to go and construct roads, which is also part of it. But also, we need resources to fix infrastructure. We need resources to run sustainable economy, sustainable policies that really address sustainable policies that make room for viable economic growth. Again, let me say clearly, for those who clap for neoliberal models, the market fundamentalists, those who think that a neoliberal model, naked capitalist movement is the way to go. Even in a naked capitalist movement, in a neoliberal society, which is not even obtainable anywhere in the world, the state needs to actually provide the development, provide the infrastructure. And we need money to provide this infrastructure. We don't have light, for instance, so we don't have health, we don't have roads, we don't have basic infrastructure that will lead to development. We don't even have viable economic policy we don't have workable economic policy that will lead to viable economic growth. And I think that these are the reasons, these are the areas we should be looking at. And by the time you still run this kind of, you release, but you have budget approval from the National Assembly, some persons go out there and don't release the money, speak the English of fiscal budget responsibility, come back to tell you, give me more 3 months, give me more 6 months. At the end of the day, you roll it over. Everybody goes, what is held accountable? That's not how to manage public resources. And a country that behaves that way is not a country that is going to make any meaningful progress, because every penny in budgets or every penny released is tied to budget, is tied to activity, it's tied to expectation or even assumption. It's tied to. So these guys have been able to spend the recurrent expenditure, the money that puts the one that their salaries, no problem, they're everything comfortably taken. But the thing that benefits the Nigerians on the streets, what people call ordinary Nigerians, because I don't like the word ordinary Nigerians, because there's nobody that is ordinary Nigerian. We are all Nigerians. The Nigerians on the streets, you and I, if they are telling you it's not only 2 or 1 or 2% released, the question is how. So when you run this kind of thing, definitely it's going to have not only negative effects, but it's also going to affect economic growth and social development. This is my take on that.
All right, so let's talk about reforms. There are reforms that basically needs to step up and to ensure that it is clear and fixing Nigeria's budget cycle. So I want to ask clearly, what reforms, in your perspective, yes, you've talked about a whole lot of things, should we pick that is needed to fix Nigeria's budget cycle? That's one. And then let's talk about should Nigeria rather, because you said I don't like to use the word ordinary, should Nigeria legislate stricter penalties for budget delays? I would want you to speak to this issue, the reforms, or should we have stricter penalties for budget delays? Because that's where we always have concern? Because you mentioned earlier where we have instance where someone sits on fund release. Those are concerns that need serious attention to be dealt with.
Well, I don't know. You're taking the conversation to different level, but that's a conversation. I think that should be conversation for another day. But then again, since you're talking in terms of reform, let's talk about it briefly. Let me say, there is no country in the world, or let me also restrict it to Nigeria. Nigeria can never, I'm sorry, I'm not a project of doom, but Nigeria can never see development. Nigeria can never see growth under the neoliberal economic policies we are running. Never. It's never going to happen because no country in the world, and I challenge any economy, and because what we do in this part of the country, that the economics in Africa, economics in Nigeria, have decided to abandon developmental economics and have decided to embrace neoliberal economic policies that have destroyed the world. As a matter of fact, Chile is one of the countries that the neoliberal policies almost destroyed. So as I speak, you see this conversation, let me bring it down to everybody's understanding that we have removed subsidy, we have floated the naira. It's never going to do anything because look, what happens? The primary responsibility of the state is to do business because the state actually exists to manage public resources. The state must be at the hand of industrialization policy and industrialization discourse. And or let me say, the only way to grow and to develop economy anywhere in the world is through industrialization and creating sustainable jobs. And the only way you create sustainable jobs is through industrialization. That is what it is. And the state must be in charge of industrialization. And that is why countries like China, countries like you see Japan, even in most of the European, some of the European countries that need development must step in the form of grants, in the form of loan, in the form of what do they call it, subsidy. You can't take away subsidy. There is no serious country in the world that leaves its economy in the hands of a free market because capitalism does two things. The primary role of capital, the basic loss of capitalism is profit making maximization. That's what it is, and exploitation. Or let me ask you, the reason they told you and I that they are removing subsidy is because the state cannot survive subsidy and they want to make more money and stop borrowing. Have we not borrowed more money since the removal of subsidy? As because what they told you when they removed petrol, when they removed subsidy in diesel, is that the market forces will force it down. Has the market forces forced diesel down? This is about 2,000 something naira. And the same thing applicable to petrol. So what are we saying? And as a matter of fact, and this is also some of the conversation when I have them, I get very angry. It is purely wickedness and intellectual gain to even sell crude in this country based on dollar exchange rate. Because the CBN Act clearly criminalizes trading in Nigeria with any other currency other than the naira. It is when you move the crude outside of this country, when you trade within the community of nations, that is when you talk in terms of dollars. So it's criminal, I'm sorry, but it's criminal to trade in dollars. CBN Act makes it criminal to trade in dollars in Nigeria. So this conversation about trading in dollars with Dangote, whatever, it's not in the, it's completely out of the place. But let me say clearly that petrol is the Nigeria energy sector. That is what it is. And if you would think that we can make progress through embracing neoliberal model of subsidy removal. What do they call it? What do they call it now? Um, um, Naira, this thing, we are not good because what has happened, I need the media to understand what has happened in energy, in the petroleum sector is not reform. That is not reform. We just made announcement because it is not, the state does not need capacity to remove subsidy. You don't need capacity to remove subsidy. Where capacity is needed is in sustaining and sustaining the subsidy governance. That is what it is. So states must take control. State must fund infrastructure. The state must support infrastructure. The state must hand out what do they call it? Credit loan to what do they call it now? To small and medium people, businesses. As we speak, even as I speak to you now, where I live in Abuja, we don't have lights. There is no light. Just now, we were lucky that today we were able to see light like 2 or 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours. And how do you do that in a country where a liter of petrol, in a country where a liter of petrol is about 1,400 where I live? And so these are reality. So I need the state needs to come down. The countries that go and use IMF and tell the Nigerian state that the way to go is through neoliberal for the purpose of intellectual conversation. Yes, we should be talking about neoliberal, but for the purpose of economic applicability, no country in the world runs on neoliberal and make progressive. So, and I challenge any economist to come and show me countries that have put people, that have put people out of poverty using neoliberal model. What neoliberal does is to destroy economy, it does two things. One, it produces the few elites who are super rich and massive citizens who are dangerously poor. So this thinking that you're pushing neoliberal, and if they ask the government, the only thing they say is that we have our economic reform is using benefits. Which benefits are they talking about? Let them go to market and price and see the price of goods and services in the market. That is where it must reflect. So this conversation here and there, that's nothing. It's not going to do. So this economic reform we are pushing, subsidy removal, and as a matter of fact, have we stopped borrowing money? The money you have made the subsidy removal, what you did, you gave the money to state governors. They have more money, and again, there's nothing to show. There's nothing to show. The state governors are making more money. The federal government have more money. Everybody is just feasting on the money, and there is nothing to show that the country, this same country we are talking about today, is a country, despite the subsidy removal and the money we've made, we are still struggling to release money for capital projects. And when you see the whole of this contradiction, it is not about embracing neoliberal.
Okay,
it's about embracing government.
Okay, so I like the fact that you've broken this down a whole lot. You've talked about it from the different reforms, because you said, let's talk about the bits, but you've taken it far beyond the bits. I like the fact that you brought in the fuel subsidy and how this has raised concern, how it has affected a lot of people, and where we are today. But one thing you said that caught my attention, and I wanted to speak to, is the issue around the debt concern, which is also the part of the borrowing. Well, a large portion of 15.8 trillion naira is going into debt servicing, which is one of the part of the borrowing. At what point does this become a concern for the economy? Let me follow up with that. And are we borrowing too much? And how sustainable can we? Because I told my co-anchor here, I said we've gone into the borrowing space far too long, and generational to come rather are saying, at what point can we pay off this debt? At what point can we finish servicing this debt? So my question to you is, are we borrowing too much? Is this sustainable in terms of servicing And how does it affect the Nigeria? How does it change anything for Nigeria when it comes to the economy?
Well, I don't know what you want me to ask. As a journalist, I will always want to throw the question back. Are we borrowing so much? The truth of the matter, yes, we are borrowing money. And it's not even that we are borrowing money. We are not, there are nothing on ground to justify the money we are borrowing. Of course, some people that support the government will say, like your colleagues say, they will always tell you in internet, according international best practices, America is borrowing, other countries are borrowing. Good, but the question is, when you borrow, let's see the evidence for which you borrowed this money for. This country will borrow money about $740 million from US, from World Bank, to say they want to do economic reform. They will still borrow another one for the same another 740 million dollars from World Bank to say they want to do economic something like economic revitalization reform. They will borrow money and call it a green energy transmission. They will borrow one and they call it electricity. So the truth of the matter, therefore, is that the uncomfortable truth that we borrow money in this country, misappropriate it and go back. Sorry, the country borrows money, misappropriates it and goes back. If you put the executive arm, put the legislative arm in a boardroom, demand verifiable evidence, measurable outcome, and measurable impact on the amount of money we have borrowed, together with even the fuel subsidy removal, the money we have made. There is actually there's not there's very little to show. And I'm saying you can't run a country this way. We can't. We can't borrow money, perhaps allegedly, share the money, returns as a country to borrow another money. Every money should be, if you call the state governors from the state and say, how did you deploy public resources given to you in the last 12 months? They really do not have an answer. The only thing the presidency will tell you is that yes, our economic reform is yielding benefits. But when you sit down and tell us clearly, clear indicators on percentages on economic employment, education, health, infrastructure, they really do not have answer. All what we do, this was you keep these words. And those who speak for governments, if you engage them, the only thing you hear from them is just abuse words and insult and abuse on those who they think are opposition members. Like for some of them who will be listening to me now, they will just say is an ADC or P2B apologist. That's what they'll say. But what we are saying really is that yes, we are having over 150 trillion naira. So the question is, what are we doing with the money? We have borrowed money even to the extent that we are talking about education for the women. Part of the World Bank. What's going on there? What's going on? So what I'm saying, therefore, is that the purpose of governance is to solve problems. That's why it's called governance. The purpose of governance is to solve problems. The purpose of governance is to utilize public resources. And I feel very frustrated that when you talk to adult Nigerians on the streets, the media people have been able to sell the narrative that politics is about interest. For God's sake, politics is not about self-interest. Politics is not an interest game. Politics is authoritative distribution of resources for public good. That's what it is. The deployment of public resources for public good. That is what it is. So this idea that what we do is that we raise money, we raise the local resources, we find a way to borrow money, and at the end of the day, we can't explain to the people what has happened to public resources. It's not where to go. That's what I'm saying. So to your question, are we borrowing too much? Yes. Not only we are borrowing too much, because there are no expressions on how we are utilizing public resources. And a country that behaves this way, cannot be said to be competing. Let me tell you if you don't know. If you go to hospitals in this country, there are nothing really apart from the bed you're going to lie down and you're even going to pay at the end of the day. There are no functional government interventions in the hospital. If you go to public universities today, students practically buy everything, including marker to write on the board. So, what exactly is the Nigerian government doing for its people? Just a question. As we speak now, the middle class are already embracing solar because there's no more lights. People are digging their borehole. Where I live, we contribute money to hire private guard. I challenge people from Lagos to Abuja. There are no roads. Immediately after Lokoja, we'll be running on people's villages to go to Ondo before you enter that funny road they call Express Road. Do you understand me? So, what exactly are we doing with our public fund? Have I already asked you something? God forbid, if Nigeria enters into war with another country, like what is happening in Iran, I can tell you that in less than 24 hours, there will be no Nigeria because we don't even have the capacity to do anything. As we speak today, if US wakes up to cut us off internet, decide to dismantle all the social media, who are we? What kind of sovereignty nation are we? I think that these emotions that we are whipping off sentiments is not the way to go. We need a state that has to come down to clearly begin to think in terms of development. Because really, as it is now, Nigeria is not pursuing anything. If I ask you now, what are we pursuing? What is our development priorities? What clearly are we pursuing in the next 4 years, in the next 3 years? There's nothing. And that is why, even as campaign is coming, put all the members of ADC, put all the members of PDP, put all the members of APC, put them in the boardroom and ask them because all of them have one common goal, which is let's capture power. We have reduced democracy to periodic election. All the agenda is let's capture power. Nobody's telling you clear terms what they want to do and how they want to do it. So we're not discussing governance in this country. We are discussing politics. It's all about noise. We are making noise rather than discuss governance. And I'm saying, look, with the way we are going, I am not a prophet of doom. We are going nowhere. There are no clear policies. There are no clear development policies. There are no clear agendas we are pursuing. We are just buying time. If you mess things up, you move, another person comes, takes it up from there. And I think that my own appeal is that the media should help Nigerian masses. They should help Nigerian people. We should reframe because democracy is not just about periodic election. Periodic election is just one component, cardinal part of democracy. Democracy itself is governance. Democracy itself is development.
So, Dr. Semi, you're throwing it back to the media. So I'm happy that because you have a background in the media as well before you got into development communication, so you understand how this works and how we try to put out the right words for people to get understanding, and how we find the balance for the government and the people. And you talk about the dividends of democracy in terms of the governance of the people and all that. So when these things are brought in, what we do as journalists, which you know as well, is to report issues, and we try to stay on facts on these issues. So let's bring it back home to all the issues around the budget and how it affects the people basically. For the average Nigerian watching right now, who wants to understand and who feels your passion to how it has gone beyond politics or elections to governance, on how the people should feel the impact of the reality of the budget. So what should they realistically expect from this budget? Because like we've seen, 68.32 trillion naira budget. The people wants to know how it gets to them. And basically want to look at the food. Food prices dropped at some point. And we'll ask the questions, will jobs also increase? If we have food price increase, will transportation become cheaper? Because you talked about the fuel subsidy with part of the reforms. We talked about the issue around the Middle East, which has also brought in the increments in surge in price of transportation, and is also getting to the point where there's peace talks within the Middle East, all of those things. So I'm looking at that. How does this translate to what you've just said should be out for the Nigerian people and how it impacts them fully?
Well, I think that the government needs to do some few things. One is that the government needs to address insecurity and the issue of food price. Farmers must go back to their farms. There is no rhetorics we will do, and people can't go back to their farms. Government must find a way to enable farmers to return to their farms. Government must find a way to address the issue of soaring farm inputs. Fertilizers and conditioner, I don't know how true it is. Somebody was telling me 2 days ago that a bag of fertilizer is almost 50 to 60,000 naira for those who manage to even get access to their farm. Again, government must find a way to address the issue of transportation, because the money we have, the destruction subsidy removal has done to Nigeria economy is more than the benefit we have made. Of course, the state governors, the presidency, who have the direct benefit to add that subsidy has done. Now the question is, we need to find a way to balance the suffering and the subsidy removal, because you must find a way to make transportation affordable. That's what it is. Secondly, the only way to address poverty and unemployment is to create sustainable jobs. And the only way to create sustainable jobs is to embrace industrialization. This conditional cash transfer that you go and count some persons, you say they are poor, and at the end of the month you give them 50,000 or 60,000 or 15,000 of all those Magnus Packer approach. They are not going to address the issue of poverty and unemployment. But let me say, because I'm on national television, and let people listen and understand. You see, the idea of measuring economic growth or development using GDP is what they call a colonial mentality or colonial and intellectual framing. Nobody measures economic growth now using GDP. So you will have some basic questions to answer before you come to conclusion whether your economy is doing well. One is what is happening to poverty, what is happening to unemployment, and what is happening to inequality. These are the issues we should be talking about, not on economic GDP numbers that do not reflect the reality of the man on the street. So to needs to come out and say, look, the truth of the matter, therefore, is that the subsidy removal, floating of naira, these are government policies that have brought untold hardship, have led to inflation. So how do we begin to address this thing? Also, I have listened to other people because if the arguments that you're removing subsidy because of the corruption in subsidy. You want to increase, you want to deregulate. The question is, have the four refineries, are they working? Since you remove subsidy, have you fixed the local refineries? Are they working? So these are the questions. So did you do reform, or you just enabled some few persons to be enjoying themselves? So the issue is that I think that we need to sit down and begin to address governance, so that at the end of the day, of course, the food prices came down during the time of harvest. As we speak today, a bag of rice is about 58,000 naira or 56,000 naira, or in a country where minimum wage is about 70,000 naira. Where I live today, there is no one bedroom flat with water, as agents say, that will be less than 1.7, 1.3 million. If you're paying 1.3 million or 1.2 million in a year, you are practically paying about 80,000 naira or 90,000 naira a month for your house rent. And a person that receives 70,000 naira minimum wage, how are you going to succeed? Come on, we should be very realistic, and government should go down to work. This is what I am saying.
And we want to really appreciate your time with us on Global Morning. You've actually simplified these issues and also brought to bear your own opinion to how these things can sit better, what would have been done differently or what should be done differently, and also a way where Nigerians need to understand what goes around the budget cycle and how this goes in time.
Most definitely, yeah, that has been a very insightful conversation. I want to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Hussaini, for breaking it down to the level of where everybody and the layman can also have an understanding of this complex topic, basically.
Well, we have that there. We'll be speaking with Dr. Abdul Liberty Oseni, who is the Director for Center for Development and Communication. He's given us in-depth analysis of this. We want a very big thank you for your time, and we hope that from what you said, governance can stand tall and it can give the needed change narrative where we have accountability and checkmates to all of these things, and where capital projects or the likes of questions and answers when budgets are presented to the legislature can be looked into in-depthly, and then Nigerians can have a better stand to know when the budget should run concurrently to the year in, year out, and not just keep extending, and where we have concerns around the reforms like you mentioned as well. Thank you so much for your time and for being with us on Global Morning. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.